This is Evan McLaughlin. I'm a content marketing specialist at Minitab. I wanted to thank you for joining our webinar series, Minitab Need to Knows. This is the second part in our three-part series, Minitab Need to Know number 2, First Steps for Data Analysis. Now I'll hand it over to our presenter, Quentin Brook, in a few moments to go over the concept of first pass analysis and the tools that will help you get started taking an initial look at your data. I'd like to start with some housekeeping notes though. The webinar audio is available through your computer. There is no dial-in number. So for the best audio quality, please make sure your speakers or headsets are turned on and the volume is up. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so you might need to log off your VPN to help if you see that issue. This webinar is being recorded as well, and we will send you the presentation and the recording by email. So if you need to drop off or if you want to review anything later, please look out for that email in your inbox. Your mics are muted, but please feel free to enter questions at any time in the questions pane. You should see that on the right in your GoToWebinar console. We do capture all questions. I will be answering them online. I also have a couple of my Minitab colleagues here to help answer, so if you're seeing audio trouble or if you are wondering about something coming up in the presentation, we'll be answering those directly online. We also have time for Q&A with our presenter, Quentin, at the end of the hour, so he'll be taking some of those questions that you've been waiting for answers for and answering them for the benefit of the entire audience. Finally, just to make this a bit interactive, we have a couple of polls throughout the webinar. So please go ahead and answer those when you see them come across the screen. They'll help us tailor the conversation for you. We'll be sending a few questions after the webinar is over too, about if you'd like to be contacted about about a demonstration or to sign up for our newsletter. So please, when you see that come up, take a few minutes to answer those questions as well. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with us, I wanted to also say a few words about Minitab. For over 40 years, Minitab has been a leading provider of quality improvement and statistical analysis software. Over 90% of Fortune 100 companies use Minitab software to improve their products and their processes. Distinguished companies and organizations that rely on Minitab software and services include Ford, the Army's Lean Six Sigma program, Bridgestone, and Xerox, just to name a few. We're also showing some other companies across the screen here, and you can see case studies at minitab.com/case studies detailing these and several other companies who we work with. And to introduce our presenter for today, Quentin Brook. He's the author of the best-selling book, Lean Six Sigma and Minitab. Quentin developed his experience of process improvement in statistical quality tools in the automotive industry of Detroit and the aerospace industry in the UK. He trained in Six Sigma with General Electric aircraft engines in Cincinnati, Ohio, before becoming managing director of OPEX Resources, where he's helped a broad range of clients deploy continuous improvement initiatives in a wide range of industries. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Quentin.
Okay, thank you, Evan. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to watch this webinar. As Evan explained, today is the second in a series of webinars titled Minitab Need to Knows. And the aim of this series is to provide you with some essential Minitab Need to Knows so that you can feel more confident with Minitab and get some useful ideas for analyzing your own data. Now, the first webinar back on May the 23rd was all about managing your data in Minitab. If you missed that, you can catch up through the on-demand webinar library at minitab.com. The second webinar today is about first steps for analyzing data in Minitab. And the final webinar on the 11th of July will provide an introduction to process capability. Okay, so on to today. As I just mentioned, today is all about first steps for data analysis. So we're going to look at some tools for taking an initial look at your data. The webinar is divided into 4 sections as shown here. So first of all, we're going to cover first pass analysis, all about making broad observations of your data with ideas for next steps. Then we're going to look at calculating key statistics, and we're going to look at Minitab's graphical summary and display descriptive statistics. Then we're going to look at how you can take an initial look at textual data, including using Pareto charts and bar charts and pie charts. And then finally, we're going to look at where next after first pass analysis, and we're going to think about when you might want to lead on to some more complex tools, but we're not going to cover those, but we're just going to talk about when you might need to use them. Okay, so the first section is all about first pass analysis. Now, I haven't told you exactly what I mean by first pass analysis on this slide, and there's a reason for that, because I want to ask you in a minute what the first things you would do with some data would be. But first of all, let's switch to Minitab at this point and take a look at some data. Okay, so here's Minitab open already, and those of you that attended the first webinar will recognize that this is the same file that we looked at last time. It's not too important really to understand the exact example of this for today's webinar, but as a reminder for those that didn't attend and for those that didn't attend last time, I'm just going to run through this data and provide some context to the example. So this was a data file of customer problems being reported into a supplier's call center from other businesses. So each row represents a problem that got reported, and the first column contains the ID that was assigned, and then the next column contains the country where that problem got reported from. And then we have some date and time stamp columns of the start time, the resolve time, and the close time of the problem. Then we have a couple of lead time columns. The first one is how long it took to resolve each problem in hours, and the next column is how long it took to close each problem in hours. And then finally, over here, we have a couple of columns of textual data, and the first one is about the problem type that was assigned to that problem report, and the last one, I'll just expand the window slightly, is about the resolution type that got assigned. Okay, so the phrase first pass analysis refers to having an initial look at your process data in order to understand a bit more about the process. And in this case, we're interested in taking an initial look at the lead time results, because this is our process performance output. Now, before I show you what I would do, I'd like to ask you what you would do first with this data via a poll. So for these columns, these lead time columns, our first poll question that I'd like to ask is, what is the first tool or technique that you would complete in Minitab to take an initial look at these columns of lead time data? Now I'm hoping that the poll is about to be opened. I'll just give a couple of seconds for that to happen. I'm not controlling the poll, so I hope that it will be opening fairly soon. Okay, here we go, it's now open. So I'll give you a few seconds to decide what your answer would be as to what is the first tool or technique that you would complete in Minitab to take an initial look at these columns of lead time data. Okay, I think we're going to close the poll fairly soon. Okay, the poll is closed and it's sharing the results. So we have a few would use SBC charts. The vast majority of you, around half, would use a histogram. Some of you would look at a normality test, and some of you would look at about 20% of you would look at a time series plot. And then there's some other in category around 6%. So that's good stuff. That's useful to me. And I think we're going to be in agreement on some of those results. So I'm going to go on to first pass analysis and explain what I mean, but I think we're on the same wavelength. Great, thank you. And it's also useful for feedback for the Minitab team. Okay. So let's take a look at what I mean by first pass analysis. So the objective of first pass analysis for me is to gain a rapid, high-level understanding of process behavior. Now, I just want to pick up on some key words in that definition. First of all, it's rapid, because we don't want to get bogged down in analysis at this stage. We want to move forward fairly quickly. It's high level, because we're going to keep it simple and looking for broad observations, not too much detail, and we're going to avoid getting bogged down in any detail. And finally, it's about process behavior. And that's important. It's not necessarily about process performance, it's about process behavior. The phrase process performance is more related to process capability. Now, I should explain first that first pass analysis isn't necessarily a widespread phrase. It's a phrase that I adopted and started using within the Six Sigma environment about 15 years ago, because I felt that it captured the essence of an important stage that people quite often jumped over. So that's the objective of it. Now what is it? Well, to me, it's the use of two key tools, the histogram and the time series plot, to have an initial look at your data. Now, these two tools are deliberately simple, high-level tools, but they're very powerful. Everyone is familiar with them and can understand them, which is a great starting point. And it's great that so many of you picked up in the poll. Half of you would have gone to histogram as your first port of call. Now, you might be wondering why there are two graphs, and that's because they do two different things, but they complement each other to provide an overall picture. So histograms on the left help us to see the overall shape of the distribution. In other words, whether it's skewed or normally distributed or has any obvious outliers, etc. And time series plots on the right help us to see whether the process is stable over time, whether it's going up or down or has any obvious changes or shifts or drifts in it. I'm going to take a quick look at what some of those things might look like. So with histograms, where we're trying to understand the overall shape of the distribution, we're interested in things like whether the distribution might be skewed in one direction or the other, as we can see in the top left here, where some of the results tend to be leaning towards the left-hand side. Alternatively, we might be interested to know if our data fits a particular model, maybe the normal distribution or a different model. And in this case, it's Minitab has put a normal curve on that histogram to help us decide. And then down in the right-hand side here, it can also help you spot outliers very clearly, because they show up clearly on a histogram. On the scale of the histogram, it needs to be expanded to include them. Now, and for time series plots, where we're looking for changes over time, they can really help us spot things like sudden changes, as shown on the left here, where the process increased, or jumping up and down, where the process is stable and then shifts, and stable and then shifts, like in the middle, or perhaps where we've got trends over time, an upward trend, or maybe even patterns within that, as shown on the right. Okay, that's the theory, or some of the theory. Now let's take a look at some examples in Minitab. Okay, so we're back with the lead time example I introduced earlier, and we're going to complete a first pass analysis of the lead time results. So first of all, I'm going to do a histogram, and for this example here, I'm going to choose the closed lead time column. So I'm going to do a first pass analysis, a histogram first. So I go to Graph, Histograms, and I'm going to use a simple histogram without a fit at this point, and click OK. And I'm going to put in closed lead time and click OK. Okay, so there's the resulting graph. And as many of you might know, lead time data is often skewed. And that's the case with this data. So most of the results here are on the left, and this histogram shows very clearly that the rate of frequency drops away until we've got just a few results up here at 4,800 or even higher. But the bulk of the data is down here around 0 to say 800 hours. Now, a trick I like to do with histograms is that because the outliers have required us to show all the data, sometimes we miss what's going on in the group of the core group of the data here. So don't be afraid to change your scales on the histograms to zoom in on particular areas. You can do that by double-clicking on the axis and taking off the auto range and just typing in your own range. So I'm going to look at what's going on between up to, say, 800 hours. So it's now zoomed in on just a portion of the histogram we were just looking at. And actually, we didn't see it at the overall level, but once we've zoomed in, we can actually see that there is no longer a smooth reduction. There are what seems to be some peaks and troughs in the histograms. So that's a useful observation that might come out of a first pass analysis. The next stage might be, why is that happening? Is that a real or is that random effect? So we might want to note that there's a frequency peak at between 150 and 170, and between 330 and 350, 470 to 490. And that's something for investigation that's come out of this first pass analysis. Okay, I'm going to go back to the data, and now I'm going to complete the other half of the first pass analysis, which is the time series plot. And just a quick but important reminder, if your data is not time ordered, you cannot do a time series plot because you won't see any trends over time, even if they were there. You would just end up with a random data, and you might read things into it that don't exist. But our data is time ordered, so I'm going to do a time series plot under graph, time series plot. I'm going to do a simple one, and again I'm going to choose close lead time and click OK. Now, time series plots can look pretty busy sometimes because all the data have an individual point, but it shows pretty much what we're expecting is that most of the results are down towards 0 and the frequency gets less and less. And here are the outliers up here, and you could use Minitab's editor brush tool to point at those and to see which row number they are, and you could go look at those and see whether they had specific assignable causes. But overall, in this time series plot, I cannot see any drastic changes between the left-hand side to the right-hand side. In other words, over time. There's nothing that really stands out like a sore thumb, with the exception of one small thing, which is that these kind of diagonal lines here are a little bit strange. Sometimes things like that happen just by chance. Sometimes there's something real going on, but that is quite a pronounced diagonal line. And you could actually drag and click a little editor brush box, and there's a trick here. If you hold down Shift and move the box around, it will keep tagged any of the dots that you go over. So I'm going to work my way down that, and I now know that they're all brushed. And for those of you that attended the first webinar, you remember that actually we looked at taking data subsets. So I'm just going to take a quick data subset from this of the brushed rows only. So I'm going to take brush rows from this graph and include those brush rows in a new worksheet called brushed. I'm going to click OK, and I'm just doing this to show you that we brushed those rows, and if we look at them, these are only the brush results. What we find is that most of them are from Belgium, and most of them got closed on the 10th of July 2006, so it's quite an old data set, but you find some commonalities amongst it, and that's an example of what you might do from an observation in first pass analysis. You can also notice that they're very similar problem types and resolution types. Okay, so that's a slight sideline, but I wanted to show you what the sort of thing is that you can do when you have noticed something in a first pass analysis. Okay, now I'm going to take a look quickly at a second example. Oops, I'll just go to here. Okay, and I'm going to look at a data set here that was taken from a final test station on an electronics production line. And it was measuring the millivolts of an electronic component. And that's all we've got. We've just got the output of millivolts. Now again, I know that this data is time ordered, so let's go ahead with the first pass analysis. So again, we go to Graph, Histogram, Simple, and click OK. I'm going to choose millivolts and click OK. Okay, and there's a histogram. Now, quite clearly, something strange is going on in that we've got an exceptional result up here, an outlier, and that's a good demonstration of what an outlier does to a histogram. It has to be included, so we've got the bulk of our data down here and just one up here included. So again, you could zoom in on this just to see what's going on in the broad, the main area of results. And when you do, actually, it looks pretty symmetrical. So what I did there is I changed the scale to just look from around 24 to 60 on that main histogram, and you can see that the bulk of the data looks fairly symmetrical. Maybe it's normally distributed. That's to be investigated next. I'm going to take back to the auto, but that's what it looked like with all the data and the outliers included. Okay, but let's do the other half of the equation. So I'm going to go to Graph, Time Series Plot, Simple, and again click millivolts and click OK. Okay, so there we are. We've got something, we can see a time series plot at the lower end there with the most of the data, and there is our outlier, and that's changing the scale somewhat. And we might have investigated that and decided to exclude that from some of our analysis going forward. And again, you could change the scale to really see what's going on here, because it appears, now that we've done the time series plot, that there might be some sort of trend over time. And that wasn't evident on the histogram, which is why they work together. So I'm going to change the Y scale and zoom in on 20 to 60 again. And that really starts to demonstrate the change in the process that appears to be going on. So it's an observation at this point. We haven't proved or disproved it with anything complex like SPC. We've made an observation that we think our process has been changing over time. Okay, now before I move on, I just want to show you a quickly a useful tool in Minitab that I sometimes use, because first pass analysis is about histograms and time series plots working together. I'm just going to change this axis back to auto. Now there is a tool in Minitab where you can group charts together into the same window, which is particularly useful for project reports or presentations, etc. So that tool is Editor, Layout tool. So if you go to Editor, Layout, it enables you to put a number of graphs into the same window. Now I only want to put my histogram and time series plot alongside each other. So I'm going to take the rows down to 1. And on the left here, I've got a choice of which graphs I've got available that I've created. Well, I want to do the histogram of millivolts, and I want to throw that over to the right. So what it's done is I started with the time series plot of millivolts, and I've added the histogram of millivolts alongside it, and that's all I wanted. So I'm going to click Finish. And what that's done, I'm just going to try and click that. That's put into a separate window, which is a useful record, the histogram and the time series plot alongside each other, which is quite a useful tool. Okay. So that was first pass analysis, and we looked at how histograms and time series plots can be used together to quickly take a look at your data, to make broad observations, and to spot things that might be worth looking at later in more detail. I think it's worth noting that at first glance, sometimes people can feel a little bit underwhelmed about first pass analysis. People are often expecting incredible revelations when they first look at their data, particularly from graphical analysis, and they're looking for instant answers, and that's rarely how things work. Instead, I think it's an extremely powerful technique to have taken the time to look at your data with histograms and time series plots and to get to know it, even at just such a high level, before moving on to anything more complex. Okay, so the second part of today's webinar is about putting numbers to the graphs. Everything we've done so far has been without any specific numbers. We've been using graphs to look at the data visually, Now, the calculation of key statistics to support the graphs is the next logical step. You need to be able to quantify your data during first-pass analysis, particularly if you're presenting findings back to others in the business, or if you're trying to establish what the baseline of your process is, for example. Now, in order to calculate key statistics in Excel, we're very used to entering a particular formula into a cell, such as average or a sum formula. But in Minitab, it's a whole lot easier to create a range of statistics for a column of data. And you can easily get statistics for subgroups within that data too. So I'm going to take a quick look at two functions in Minitab that do that. They are the graphical summary and the display descriptive statistics functions. Okay, so I'll switch back to Minitab at this point. And I'm going to go back to the lead time example that we were looking at earlier. So if I find that worksheet. Okay. Now, first of all, we're going to use the Minitab graphical summary, and I'm going to use it to create some key statistics for the closed lead time column that we were looking at. So first of all, I'm going to go to Stat, Basic Statistics, Graphical Summary. Okay, and I'm going to change that, and I'm going to put in closed lead time. So we're analyzing closed lead time, and I'm going to click OK. Now, graphical summaries provide you with quite a lot of information in one area. They provide, and it's worth noting, by the way, you might not need all of this information. So sometimes they're a little bit too much information for presentation purposes, but they can be useful for you in terms of analysis. So here's the histogram, and we saw that earlier. Now, Minitab has automatically put a normal curve on that, and we know that really that probably isn't the right distribution to fit to our data. So you need to remember that and be aware of it. It then presents a box plot of the data horizontally below it. And below that, there's some confidence intervals put into a graphical format. Now, we're not going to go into confidence intervals today, but that's what they are. And over on the right, there's a whole range of statistics. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm particularly interested in these two boxes here. So we've got the mean, which is 519.15, standard deviation of 672, sample size N of 1545. We got some minimum, quartile, maximum, and median figures in the next box. So there's some pretty useful key statistics that you might want to remember and to present with your graphs. Okay, so the other way of getting key statistics for your data is to go to Stat, Basic Statistics, Display Descriptive Statistics. Now, again, I want to analyze closed lead time, and I don't want to have any variables at this point. Now, before I click OK, I want to just show you that if you click the Statistics submenu, now these are the default statistics that Minitab will create for what we're looking at here. And you can add things if you want to. There's cumulative percentages, range, sums, trimmed means, etc. But the default is a pretty good mix of key statistics. So if in doubt, I would just use that. But you can add things or take things away. So I'm going to leave them as their default settings. And I'm going to click OK. Now, nothing's popped up. And that's because the display descriptive statistics function, the output of that function is in the session window. So if I go to the session window folder here, and it's got a history of what I've been doing in this webinar so far. And at the bottom of it, you'll see our descriptive statistics result. I'm going to try zooming in on that. I'll try that again. There you go. I'm just increasing the font size slightly. So it just presents it slightly differently, but there is the closed lead time results as a variable, 1545 sample size, and there's our mean again of 519.1. Actually, we know it's 519.15. We've got our standard error mean, standard deviation, minimum, maximum, etc. Okay. Now, before I move on, I just want to show you that we can also use the same function to calculate the statistics for subgroups within the data, and that's pretty useful. So going back to the data itself, we've been looking at key statistics for closed lead time. But it might be later on in analysis that you might say, well, I want to know what the key statistics are for lead time for the different countries over here, or maybe for different problem types over here. And you can do that quite simply by using the by variable boxes that we saw. So I could go back to display descriptive statistics under stat basic statistics, and I could put in closed lead time again, but this time round we can put in a by variable box, and we could put in the country code, so it will divide the data out into all the different countries before it calculates the statistics. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier, by the way, is that you can also get graphs with this display descriptive statistics function. So quite often, if you use this right at the beginning, you can just access a histogram here. It's exactly the same as doing it through the graph menu. Okay, and I'm going to click OK. And again, the output is in the session window. So if we go to our shortcut and the session window, now instead of just one result for closed lead time, it's now given us a data table which has got the countries listed here, and then for each country it's providing us with the sample size and the mean, standard deviation, the same statistics that we saw before but divided out. So that's pretty useful sometimes to get to some quick results. Okay, now once you've calculated some key statistics, you might find it useful to put them onto your graphs that you created to give them more meaning. So if you remember, we found that the average for our lead time was 519.15. It's just here on the graphical summary. So it might be useful to put that key statistic back on the histogram and the time series plots. So if I go back to the histogram, you can add things to Minitab graphs. If you right click and go to add, I'm going to add a reference line. And I want to add that reference line at the data value 519.15, which was our mean. So there it is. I've actually got to take this scale back to auto, which is how we had our histogram in the first place. And there is the average displayed on the histogram. And that can be quite useful. You could display the median or the average. That can be quite useful when presenting things back to people in your business. And I could have done the same on the time series plot, but in this case I need to add it to this scale here. So I'm going to right click, add reference line, and put it on the Y value of 519.15. And if you wanted to, you could change the formatting of that to beef it up a little bit so that you could see it more clearly. Okay, so before we finish up with this section, I just want to talk about how important it is to document your analysis as you go. To me, documenting your analysis as you go is critical to success. Without documenting what you've done and what you've found, you'll quickly find that you get confused as to what your analysis has shown you and what your next steps are. So in real life, I would have documented the first pass analysis work today as I went. And before I show you how I would have done that, I'd like to ask you how you document your analysis work via our second poll today. Okay, so the question for this second poll is, how do you document your analysis findings? And there are some answers there. I'd like you to just take a look, choose which one is most appropriate to you. Okay, great. I think we'll start to close the poll when you're all done. So do go ahead and choose your answer. Okay, so that's sharing the poll results right now, and that should be showing that most of you, around 73% of you, said I cut and paste a PowerPoint or Word. 12% of you said I use Minitab's report pad. 8% of you said I don't explain, or I don't really document my analysis in detail as I go, and there were some others as well at 7%. So that's useful feedback, and I'm going to try and convert some of you today and introduce you to Minitab's report pad. Okay, so on occasion I do cut and paste to PowerPoint or Word. It's pretty easy. It's pretty compatible with Minitab, and particularly if I'm preparing a presentation. Now, for documenting things as I go, however, and that's an important distinction, not creating a presentation, but just documenting what I've done, I do use Minitab's report pad. And I just want to show you how easy that is to use that. So here we are in Minitab on a graph. And if I wanted to send this to my report pad, which is a sort of historical document of what I've been doing, I can right-click on it. And yes, there are the options to send them to Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, but I can also append this graph to the report pad. And now that is within Minitab. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm just going to go now to the shortcut to report pad at the top here and click on that. Now the report pad is really a little bit like Word in the way that it's just a place where you can put things and type things. And so putting a graph into the report pad puts it there permanently, even if you go ahead and delete the graph from your project afterwards. It will be stored here permanently after you've done that. And you can also make notes in here. Just say, I think this time series part is ... is showing me whatever key observations you want to make. And you might then say, so the next thing we need to look at is this or that. It's a place to document your findings, your observations, and to put graphs that you really want to keep permanently. Okay, so I wanted just to show you that because it's a pretty useful function. So that was putting numbers to the graphs, and we looked at Minitab's graphical summary and display descriptive statistics, and we also covered quickly at the end there about how to document your findings as you go and use Minitab's report pad. So now we're going to have a little look at some ideas for taking a quick look at textual data. Now that's where histograms and time series plots can't be used because it's not numerical data, but you might have a situation where your process output is in textual form or categorical form, and you might want to analyze that quickly too. So I'm going to switch to Minitab again, and I'm going to go back to our example of lead times. Now in this particular example, let me just get that right on the screen. We've got some categorical information in the column 2, which is country, and the problem type, and the resolution type over here. Now those aren't particularly process outputs, but just for the purpose of the webinar today, I'm just going to show you how you can quickly take a look at those types of columns of data, even though they're not numbers and you can't use histograms and time series plots. But the key thing you might want to know really is what's the frequency of particular results in those columns. Now, again, for those that attended webinar 1, you'll remember that in particular, we used for categorical data like this, we use the Pareto chart, which is under Stat, Quality Tools, Pareto chart. And you just put in the column that you want to analyze, in this case country is already there. And you don't need to put in anything else, just put in the single column and click OK. And it very quickly gives you a Pareto chart, very simply for that column of data, telling you what are the most frequent results, and it tells us that most of our results came from Belgium, and that was 30%, and then 30% and 27% came from United Kingdom, etc. Okay, now similarly, you could also do a bar chart, and these are sort of things that are more familiar in Excel maybe, but Minitab can do them all too. So you have bar charts down here under graph, and you can click OK. You're going to do a count of unique values in a column. And again, we're going to put in the country column and click OK. And it's that simple. So there we have a bar chart, and it's not in the same order as the Pareto because bar charts aren't. This one is ordered by alphabetical results for the name of the countries. But it gives you a quick bar chart of the frequency of the results. And finally, again, something you might do quite often in Excel, and again, you can do in Minitab, is a pie chart. If you prefer to document it like that, you could say, I want to look at the country and click OK, and it will give you a pie chart of the country column. So there you go. I'm covering those quite quickly, but I just wanted to show you that analyzing categorical columns is quite simple too. In just a high level analysis, what is it I got in this column and what are the most frequent results? You can use any one of those three graphs. Okay, so that was quite briefly an initial look at textual data, and we covered Pareto charts, bar charts, and pie charts. Okay, now for the last few minutes of my presentation, before we take some questions from you all, I'm going to cover the final section, which is around where next after first pass analysis. So we've been focused so far on taking an initial look at the data, and I hope that one of the key messages that has come across is that you don't need to jump straight into complex graphs and statistical analysis. And it was great to see so many of you indicating in the first poll that you would use a histogram first. So I think there is huge value in keeping things simple, using the basic techniques we saw in first pass analysis first, drawing some initial conclusions, and only then using the more complex techniques to investigate specific questions or observations that you've got from your first pass analysis. So very often people have trouble thinking about, well, what tool to use when. And I put this slide together for this webinar just to try and maybe help us think about that. So out of first pass analysis, you will have noticed things to investigate further. And what I've tried to capture on this slide is that you should always be clear why you have decided to use a more complex graph or technique. And I like to group most areas of analysis into what you're trying to look at, as shown here. So if you are looking at distributions, for example, then today we've started with a histogram as a first step. Now, if you want to get a bit more complex and you want to answer questions like, I wonder if my data fits a particular distribution, then yes, you might want to move on to probability plots and normality tests. But we start with the simple, which is the histograms. Similarly, if you're looking for changes over time, then we've looked today at starting with a time series plot. And only then, if you notice some things or you want some more detailed analysis, would I suggest going on to something like trend analysis or run charts or statistical process control, SPC. Now, out of the Pareto charts we looked at, you might decide that you want to compare groups of proportions. So we might end up saying, I want to compare the lead time for different countries. So out of the Pareto charts, first of all, you might come out with some questions, and that might lead you on to using more advanced graphical techniques like box plots and individual value plots, or even statistical techniques like hypothesis testing. And then finally, if you think that you're looking for relationships between some of the variables in your data, then you might have spotted some of those on scatter plots, although we haven't covered those today. And after that, you might want to get into some more complex techniques like bubble plots or even statistical techniques like correlation and regression. But the key message that I want to leave you with from this slide is that we start simple and we bring in the advanced techniques later on. So that was a brief discussion on where next after first pass analysis. And that's what I have to show you in Minitab today. Again, we've covered 4 areas. First pass analysis, putting some numbers to the graphs with graphical summaries and display descriptive statistics, and then how to take an initial look at textual data with Pareto charts and bar charts and pie charts. And then finally, we've just spent a very brief amount of time thinking about where next after the basics and when would you bring in some more complex techniques. So I hope there were some useful ideas and reminders in there for you. Before I hand over back to Evan, I'd like to quickly provide you with a little thank you for attending the live webinar today, and this will be familiar to those of you that attended the first webinar. As Evan mentioned at the beginning, I'm the author of a book called Lean Six Sigma and Minitab, and that provides practical advice in a similar approach to this webinar today. And as a thank you for attending the webinar live, we've set up a free shipping coupon which you can use on our website, opexresources.com, if you'd like to order the book. This is only available through a week from now until June the 20th. You just need to enter the promo code Minitab free ship. That's all one word to get free shipping on your order, and we'll leave that in place till the 20th of June. So that's that quickly, and thank you for attending. So now I'll hand you back to Evan for a bit, and then we'll cover any questions you might have.
Thanks so much, Quentin. That was great. Yeah, I wanted to give you guys a little bit more information about the Minitab business and also our Insights conference coming up. So, as you can see here, you can get lots more Minitab help and continue the conversation with us as well as meet several industry leaders passionate about data analysis and process improvement. Share your knowledge, expand your statistical analysis and quality improvement skills, and of course, network. So this is our third year putting on the Insights Conference. This year will be at the Scottsdale Resort at McCormick Ranch in Arizona, September 12th through 14th. And over the past few years, we've seen more than 60 presentations from some of the brightest minds in the business, and it just keeps getting better. We've also heard great reviews of the expert advice we provide in the Minitab Lab that will help you master new skills and leave with new strategies and greater confidence to deliver results. New this year, we'll also have a user-centered design studio. That's where our top software designers will put you in the front seat to test drive our latest products. You can give your feedback, see what features and capabilities you'd like to see next to help you run experiments, gain key insights, and work more efficiently, and really influence the next release of Minitab software. So the program and speaker information is out now. You can go to info.minitab.com/insights to learn more and register. And through the end of the month, we have early bird pricing. So just about 3 weeks left here, you can save $100 off the full conference price. And to give you all more information about all the Minitab offers, our products and services here, Minitab statistical software, which you've seen plenty of information from Quentin about here in the demonstration. It's been used in implementing countless improvement initiatives around the world. Companion by Minitab is used for continuous improvement project management. We also have Quality Trainer, an online statistics teacher with animated lessons and hands-on exercises, and SPM Salford Predictive Modeler, our platform for data mining and predictive analytics. In the services area, we offer training year-round, and you can also bring a Minitab trainer to your company to teach your staff. We also offer statistical consulting. And you can learn more about that if you go to minitab.com/support. You'll see we have our phone numbers available online, and you can also reach out to us via email, get the tech support really any time of day. And now I'll just repeat the housekeeping notes again before I hand it back over to Quentin for fielding some Q&A here. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll send you the presentation and the recording by email. Don't worry if you need to drop off. If you want to review anything later, please look out for that email in your inbox, or if you want to share it with your teammates or anything like that. Also, we'll be sending a few questions after the webinar is over. So when your GoToWebinar screen closes, please look out for that survey you see pop up. You can share with us if you're interested in getting a demonstration, or if you'd like us to reach out to you, or if you want more information about Minitab news or other communications that we send out. So Quentin, it looks like we have a good handful of questions here. If you want to take a look at those and answer some of them.
Yes, thank you. I'm having a little trouble seeing them, so give me 2 seconds. I'm not quite sure why I can't expand that. There we go. Right. Okay, bear with me, everyone. Sorry about this. I just need to expand the area that I can see. Okay, I think I can see them now. So I'm going to go back up and take a look through. Now, I'm going to just scroll down. There's quite a few from early on, so I'll try and get to the ones that have been flagged up. So here's one from Kurt Garcia. When you use the time series chart, where does Minitab get the second axis from? Meaning on side is time, what is the axis? So we've got time along the bottom on a Minitab chart, and up on the other side is the actual data value. So if I go back to Minitab and I go to graph and I find a time series plot, so this is the row number that we got the data from across the bottom, okay, working from the top of the worksheet down. And here is the actual data value. So this is the actual value that it saw in the actual spreadsheet. So that's the data values, and this is the number of the row in the worksheet across the bottom. Okay. Let me just have a look at some other questions here. I'm just having to scan through them as I go. There's one around, I'm going to leave that one, sorry, I'm just scanning them as I go. So on a time series plot, how do I look at data by months? In Excel, I have to format date. Okay, so I think it might be possible to do that, but you have to be a little bit careful with dates in that there might be some quite big gaps in your date, and if you try to actually scale the bottom axis for time properly rather than just a point after point, it can be quite confusing. But I think you can do some things like that. But in general, I don't worry too much. If I know that I've got a column of data that's been taken consecutively over time, I don't try to introduce groups by scaling it exactly for time. Can you print out information from the report pad for a hard copy report? I'm absolutely confident you can, but I'm going to possibly defer to the Minitab experts there. So hopefully we might have an answer for you, if not during the webinar, then afterwards. What does IDI stand for? Yes, my apologies. That was probably on, let me just go back to, well, it's not there. Maybe it was earlier on. So IDI stands for Individual Distribution Identification. And I didn't realize it was somewhere else, obviously, in the presentation, but it's a technique in Minitab that can help you try to establish from quite a big range of different distributions which one your data might fit. Okay, there's something about slides here. Yes, the slides will be available from the presentation. About SPC and control charts, how to analyze your data who shows a strong change in the mean. Okay, so that's quite a, SPC is quite a huge area, and there's a whole range of charts to choose from. And it all depends which chart to use, depends on the type of data you have. So you have to understand the type of data that you have, attribute or variable data or continuous, etc. So actually, I've just noticed that chap has left the conference already or the webinar. So, but yes, so I'm going to leave that question for now. Let me just try and scan a couple more. Okay. Sorry about this. I'm just reading them as I go. There's some more about the slides. Could you put the slide back up about the book? I didn't capture the info needed to order. Okay, I can tell you that. It is opexresources.com. That is there. And the code to put in if you want free shipping is Minitab free ship, all one word. Okay. I hope that answers. You can always find that after again from the Minitab team. Okay, so is first pass analysis different for experimental data or observational data? I would say yes, because I don't think it really applies so much to the experimental data. Controlled experiments fall under the whole designed of experiments structure, where you've been deliberately manipulating the process as you go. So in an experiment, you know the process has changed probably because you've been changing the inputs. So we're using first pass analysis here on observational data to try and help us decide, has there been a change over time and what is the overall shape of the distribution? But in an experiment, if you were to analyze all of your experimental results and look at the histogram for them, you have to remember that in that histogram, there's a whole load of variation that's come from the fact that you've been changing the process during the experiment. So no, I think their use for experimental data isn't so suitable in terms of what we've been discussing today. It's mainly for observational or historical data. Okay, so what else have we got here? I'm just scanning down. Okay, so there's one here that says, sorry if you covered this already, I did not receive the link for downloading the last session's video recording. If you go to minitab.com to the webinar section, it's pretty easy to find. I'm not going to do it right now on screen. I bet something would go wrong, but it's pretty easy to find. Go to the webinars, I think it's under support, and under webinars, there's definitely an option to catch up with past webinars, and it's already on there. It's pretty easy to find. If you can't find it, phone up Minitab or their support line, and they'll find it for you. Okay. Again, there's a question about the website and the code for the book. I think I've covered that one. Can you export or copy and paste from the report pad? I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm not the Minitab tech on this side of things, but I would imagine you could copy that and paste it somewhere else in a Microsoft type application. So give it a go, but I think you probably can. Again, there's a question on IDI. I think I've covered that, which is individual distribution identification. Okay, there's some questions here. Let me just scan them. There's some ones about Minitab. Okay, that's something about the software licensing. I'm going to leave that. How do you update? Here's a question here. How do you automate the upload of continuous data collection to existing worksheets and graphs and ensure the upload applies to the individual graphs? Okay, so in the first webinar, I mentioned briefly that you can link Minitab projects to specific Excel files and build a link there, and then when you open them up, they'll go and update the data. We didn't cover it in detail, but it is possible if you have an Excel file or a CSV file somewhere that is updated from your production line, you can have it so that when you open up Minitab, I believe it will then upload the data again, and you should be able to have the graphs automatically refresh themselves too. Again, it's slightly more techie from the Minitab perspective, so I would defer to Minitab for that one if you have any questions. Okay, and there's one here. I think my problem is when I start flailing away, creating graphs, this person has said, besides report pad, how do I know what graph was for what when I look down the project list of graphs? Well, this will be the last question just quickly. One of the things I really like to do that is useful is just to rename your graphs. If you just click on them and then click once slowly, you can change the name of them. And you can just say this was the first histogram with something in particular, for example, and you can just do that. So we're very close to the top of the hour, but you can rename them, and you can also just double click on the title and change it. So I can't see that right now, but let me try and do that for you. So if I click on, I can't quite get that to work right now. That's what usually happens on webinars, but you can change the titles and change the text on the side, and you can do that to help yourself remember what exactly it was that you were looking at. So we're really close to the end of the hour here, so I better finish up on the questions. We'll try to get them answered after the webinar, any that we haven't got to. So I'm just going to go back to PowerPoint, and I'll hand over at this point back to Evan. But thank you very much from myself for attending, and back to Evan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Quentin. We appreciate it. I'll reiterate, I know we saw some questions about receiving the recording and the presentation. If you go back to our Minitab Need to Know's landing page, there is a link to the on-demand webinar. Also, we actually did post some of the questions from our first recording at blog.minitab.com. So you'll see, I believe the second blog there is some questions that we ran out of time to answer. So again, we are capturing all the questions here, and we'll be examining them later on too, and seeing if we can post some more information online. So you should be receiving the presentation, but go ahead and keep posted on blog.minitab.com to see the questions from last time as well. And also, I just wanted to remind everybody one last time, if you do have a couple more minutes after we close the webinar here, we appreciate it if you're able to sign up for our Minitab newsletter and answer some questions about if you'd like us to contact you or what kind of software you're interested in. It really helps us out. So look for that survey that pops up as soon as the GoToWebinar window closes here. But yes, it looks like our time is up. So on behalf of all of us at Minitab, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. And we hope that you can join us again July 11th for the final webinar in the series. And be on the lookout for the slides and recording from today's presentation later on as well. Thanks again, and have a good day. Goodbye.